Dr. King lived only 39 years. So he has now been gone from us longer than he lived among us. He warned us and challenged us when he came to the pulpit 42 years ago to remain awake during the Great Revolution. He said, don't ever, when you deal with justice, go to sleep. Stay awake, stay alert, stay aware, and keep on pushing. Dr. King had been in Memphis marching in support of sanitation workers. Some folk call them garbage collectors. Two of them, Eco Cole and Robert Walker, had been crushed in a mechanical malfunction because the city rules forbade black employees to seek shelter from the rain anywhere but in the backs of their compressor trucks with the garbage. They were treated like garbage, and they had been crushed when an electrical shortage caused that truck to close upon them. They had a march, but violence broke out because the FBI and others had infiltrated the ranks of Dr. King. Dr. King, in the last week of his life, was under great pressure. His staff didn't even want him in Memphis. Some of them said they're just garbage workers. You're a PhD, you're leading a movement. Why would you go to Memphis? They're just garbage workers. But Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. If I could this morning, let me make a move from there and say, how dare us ever think some people don't matter? How dare us ever think that some people are unimportant? Everybody is somebody. People are all important. Not just the highfalutin, not just people with title, but people are important. Touch your neighbor and say, everybody's important.
Everybody's important.
So don't you ever get so crazy that you look down on me.
All right. All right. All right.
Dr. King was under great pressure when he preached to us last. He was in that place that the theologian Paul Tillich called when you simply have to have the courage to be. He was under pressure. His back was against the wall. Every major civil rights organization had stood against him, even in the presidency at that moment, because of his stance against the war. Preachers had turned their backs on him. Young folk that wanted to do violent rather than non-violent had turned on him. And during his last week, he was not the toast of the town. Memphis called him Chicken a la King because he told him he left and went to Washington, D.C. The St. Louis Globe called him the most menacing man in America. So Dr. King stood in the pulpit twice. The last week he was with us, a mocked man, a scorned man, a rebuked man, a man beset with outer and inner conflicts. Now many times, Dr. Randolph, we don't understand this kind of pressure because we don't do that kind of preaching. One theologian said we are not in no particular danger because too often we have adjusted to an anti-prophetic age. Sometimes we see people walk in the pulpit, they got 7 people protecting them, but they ain't preaching nothing. There's no righteous anger, there's no challenge, there's no threat to anybody in particular. But remember, Jesus almost got killed at his first sermon in Nazareth. Why? Because the world loves the tombs of the prophets. The world don't like prophets. The world doesn't like prophets because prophets disturb us. Prophets get under our skin. Prophets shake us from our slumber. Prophets discomfort us. The world doesn't like prophets, and sometimes neither does the church. Prophets expose our injustices and our contradictions. Prophets put us to shame. The world doesn't like prophets, and sometimes the church refuses to celebrate them until they're dead. That's why you have to be careful how you celebrate Dr. King.
All right now.
Remember, for his preaching, he was bombed in Montgomery, jailed in Birmingham, and urinated on in Augustine, stoned in Chicago, invited to leave town in Cleveland, and unwanted in Atlanta, and killed in Memphis. Why? Because he dared to say the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. Come to preach no news. Dr. King understood that theology, economics, politics, and sociology all go together. When you preach a real So the truth is, if we are preaching a gospel that has nothing to do with politics, nothing about economics, nothing about justice, nothing about sociology, it's not the gospel, it's a half gospel, it's a scared gospel, it's a lying gospel. It might be popular, but it's not powerful.
Come on now.
That's where King was the last week of his life. People were against him, but he stood tall and strong. And there are these three things he told us that last week when he was at Mason. And then he went to Mason Temple on April 3rd, 1968. He was tired, he was depressed, he didn't even come out that night. There were tornado warnings in the air. He told Abernathy to go on, I'm going to stay in, I really don't feel like it. He was under pressure. Abernathy said, look, the folk had come out, it was in the storm. They want to hear from you, not from us. So he got up and he went on, and then he began, when he got there, God got a hold of him. He began to talk to us from the mountains. Yeah. The first thing he said that you ought to remember is what I've already said, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. You don't ever be silent when it comes to injustice.
All right.
But then the second thing he said to us that night, and if you read the whole speech, you'll find it, Doc, he said nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. 10 words that we still need to hear today. When we can elect an African-American president in a country that once codified slavery in the sacred words of its Constitution, and instead of this whole nation being released from the demonic nature of racism, hate groups increase, those still haunted by white supremacist attitudes see the election of President Obama as a sign of white dispossession, as a national sin. When we got those kind of attitudes still in America, nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn that now, Brother Lennon. When politicians are so sick with greed and partisan ideology and a disdain for a president that passed health care reform after 100 years of trying, that they will leave the pain of Tucson, Arizona, and schedule a vote this week to repeal health care reform that will pain America. They will try to undermine, while they themselves are getting government health care, they're going to try to undermine 32 million Americans from getting health care. I can tell you, nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. As long as there's a political party drinking some kind of tea, I don't know what's in it, but it's potent. Somebody said there's some racism in it. Somebody said there's some hatred in it. Somebody said there's some nationalism in it. But whatever's in it, it causes their leaders to put bullseye targets on people they don't like. It causes them to refuse to believe the president was born in America. I don't know what's in that tea, but Rush Limbaugh drank some of it, and you can hear it in his movies. When Blake drinks it, he acts like a buffoon. When O'Reilly drinks it, he's outrageous. When Sister Sarah drinks it, she sounds mighty silly. Nothing would be more tragic. What? Than for us to turn back. As long as politicians can run and get elected on not how they serve, but how many people they can tear down. As long as they use code words like take our country back, which have historic ties to campaigns that led to the founding of the KKK and the deconstruction of Reconstruction. And though that word, take back America, was the foundation of every race ride in this country. When you use terms like that that have deep psychic imprint upon the memory of America, you have to exegete yourself. You have to explain to yourself, what do you mean take back our country? Take it back from who? Take it back when? Take it back. Why do you want to take it back when we have a president that happens to be black? Why do you want to take it back when we have a sister that's shown up black? Why do you want to take it back when 2 black girls are having pajama parties in the White House? Why do you want to take it back? As long as people got attitudes like that, nothing would be more tragic than for us to
take it back.
or turn back now. As long as we are faced with an economic situation exacerbated by Bush mess and Bush wars. The truth of the matter is we're not in an economic crisis because we spend too much money on education. We're not in an economic crisis because we don't give enough tax cuts to the wealthy. We're not in an economic crisis because we're helping people that need help. We're not in an economic crisis because of health care. We're in an economic crisis because of all these ungodly, misguided, wrong wars that we have fought. We're in an economic crisis because when leaders make rules that allow Wall Street to pimp and prostitute our people and predatory lenders that steal from our people. That's why we're in an economic crisis. We're in an economic crisis, and as long as we are, nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back. Now, don't you be fooled that this crisis is a depression for some people, created by years of deregulation and misguided wars, where we can find trillions of dollars to go to war for things we shouldn't even be fighting for and can't even help people in our own country. Here we are with 20 to 35% unemployment among Black and Latinos, depending on where you are in the nation. 1 in 3 working family lives in or near poverty. 44 million people in poverty. Last Thanksgiving, 42 million Americans used food stamps. That's 15 million more than when this Bush mess got started. Here we are in what's called the Black Belt, the 11th state: Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. In these 11 states, there are 11 million people living in poverty. Poverty is somebody making less than $19,000 a year in a family of 4. Most of the people in poverty are working. And 26.35 of African Americans in the Southern Belt are in poverty. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to stop now. Otto Schwab, an economist from MIT, says we have the blind spot of conscience in our economy, and we've not learned what Dr. King said 40 years ago when he told the story about diabetes, the rich man, and Lazarus, the poor man, and diabetes died, and Lazarus died, and diabetes went to hell, and Lazarus went to heaven, and diabetes then begged Lazarus to go back. But the King said what that story teaches us is if you don't treat Lazarus right, if you don't treat the poor right, there's going to be hell to pay in this economy. You can't make it work. Everybody right. Nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. When I come from a state where the Voting Rights Act is being challenged in court right now, and if we were to lose that battle, every city councilman and county commissioner and legislator and congressperson that's elected to a minority district would no longer have those districts cut out by redistricting. And the same money that's funding the Tea Party is funding that suit, that challenge to the Voting Rights Act. As long as we are underfunding our public schools, as long as resegregation is an epidemic in this country, as long as resegregation is not only resegregating bodies, but budgets and books and the basic building blocks of a sound basic education, as long as green still follows white and wealthy, as long as we know our children can learn, fleecy locks and dark complexion cannot alter nature's claim. Skin color may differ, but perfection dwell in black and white just the same. If I was taught to reach the pole or grasp the whole ocean with a span, I must be measured by my soul, for the mind is the standard of the man. And as long as we know that, but we still hurt our children, and still won't fund our schools, and still put more money in the prison than we do in the education right here in South Carolina, right in North Carolina, then nothing would be more tragic than for us to stop now. As long as down here in South Carolina, a state still wants to wave a flag that represents terrorism and hatred and meanness, rooted in white supremacy. And as long as some white folk don't get it, and some black folk don't even care, nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. A white says our nation has slept for decades under the myths grounded in race. He said, I grew up being taught that the Civil War was about federalism and not slavery. He says, my textbooks called those who wanted to take the South back redeemed